Hey, Robert, you can go right ahead. Thank you for coming tonight. And
Okay.
thanks, Gwen.
Well, thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr to Donnell Artillery for inviting me and the Great Plains Welsh Heritage Project to participate in this series of presentations. And my name is Robert Humphries. You can probably tell that I'm not a native of the United States. I was actually born in Wales. And one of the things that I do is research and write about the history of Welsh people in America. It's quite possible that some of you may not even be very familiar with Wales and what the meaning of the word Welsh is. So I'm going to explain a little bit about that, give you an overview of the history of Welsh Americans, Welsh immigrants, and their descendants in the United States specifically. I am speaking to you tonight from Spring Green, Wisconsin, which is where I live. And I am, however, affiliated tonight with the Great Plains Welsh Heritage Project, which is located in Wymore, Nebraska. We are an organization that is devoted to telling the story of Welsh immigrants, settlers, pioneers who arrived on the Great Plains in the 19th century, and their history, their genealogy, and so forth. And we see this as contributing to the diversity of American society. So you may wonder why I'm speaking to you from Wisconsin, whereas the organization is based in Nebraska. We have board members all over the Midwest and the Great Plains, and people who are interested, and members of our organization all across the United States. We have a lot of connections with people in Wales and elsewhere in the world as well. So before I go any further, I also want to point you to the image that you see on the title page here. You see a red dragon, which is the symbol of Wales, the Welsh people, and it is carrying a shield. It's bearing a shield with what obviously is a version of the American flag, the Stars and Stripes. And underneath it is, you can see a scroll that says, y ddraig goch a ddaru cychwyn, which is a Welsh saying that I suppose you could sort of casually say it means the red dragon gets things done. So, what I'll be talking about is explaining how these people, they came from Wales, they came from this country where they spoke a different language. They, even in the United States, they maintained their language and culture, but they also became Americans. And this is, of course, an experience that is shared by many different ethnic groups who came to the United States. So I'm going to start my slideshow here. So my first slide here says, Ble mai Cymru, or where is Wales? Ble mai Cymru, well, that's where is Wales in the Welsh language. And the Welsh language is one of the things that really distinguishes Wales and Welsh culture. And there is a map of Wales where it is located in Great Britain. You can see the island of Great Britain, and you can see the United Kingdom, which currently includes Northern Ireland. You see Ireland off to the west, and Wales is situated just to the west of England. Sometimes people are not exactly sure where Wales is or what it is. It's about the size of Massachusetts. It currently has a population of about 3 million people. So Wales is quite a small country. But once you get through this presentation, I'm sure you'll agree that it's had quite an outsized influence on the United States, and eventually you'll discover too that on the world at large. And I should say that Ble mai Cymru, I'm saying that in Welsh here. The Welsh language is a Celtic language, so it is a language that is sort of a cousin to Irish and Gaelic, which is spoken in Scotland, and also Cornish, which is a language that is spoken by a small number of people today in Cornwall, Breton, which is spoken in Brittany in northern France, and Manx, which is another language that is closer to Gaelic. So those are the 6 living Celtic languages, and Welsh is one of them. And Welsh is actually the most successful of them in terms of being supported and being used today. About 20% of the population of Wales speaks and uses this language every day. And it is taught in Wales in schools, used in schools. It is spoken by many people throughout the world from Wales. And there is an active community of people here in the United States who are not only, some of them are Welsh speakers from Wales, but there are also many people who are learning Welsh. Some of those people may or may not have a connection to Wales or be of Welsh ancestry. But the Welsh language is something, if you're interested in it, I can connect you with people who can teach you. So just to give you a very brief overview, and I will go through this very quickly, of Wales and Welsh history up to, from the Middle Ages to the present day. Wales was never really unified as a state or as a single kingdom in the Middle Ages, but it was unified by a common language and a culture that went along with that language. Welsh people saw themselves as a nation, even if they were not politically unified under one leader. The conquest of the Kingdom of Gwynedd and the defeat of its Prince Llywelyn in 1282 by the English King Edward I brought an end to Welsh independence, and that would continue through the remaining centuries. However, there was a rebellion in 1400 led by a man named Owain Glyndŵr, who proclaimed himself the Prince of Wales. And this grew out of a feudal dispute with another lord in Wales, and then turned into a sort of a national rebellion that was unsuccessful, but it was the first time that and the idea of Wales as a nation, you know, with all the apparatus of a state, was really articulated. And then the next big change in Wales comes with the incorporation of Wales into the English state under King Henry VIII. Between the years 1536 and 1542, a couple of acts of parliament that changed the status of Wales. Essentially, it does fall under the authority of fully under the authority of the English Crown and Parliament and the judicial system. At this point, the Welsh language is no longer the primary language of the state. It is now in Wales. Courts have to use or at least the chief language of the courts in Wales is English, and so this changes the relationship again between England and Wales, and actually the Welsh gentry at the time are actually sort of in favor of it. These are the landlords. These are people who are actually descendants of the Welsh princes, because they see themselves as sort of modernizing by becoming part of England. In the subsequent centuries, in the 1600s, after the English Civil War, you have the growth of nonconformist denominations. These are Protestants who disagree with the Anglican Church, such as the Baptists, the Quakers, and the Methodists. And there are a number of significant religious revivals which take place, which build these denominations to considerable strength in Wales. And you know, this is sort of a resistance to, in many ways, to English rule and authority, in that these people are also practicing their religion through the medium of Welsh, and disagreeing with the English state church, which they see as imposed upon them. The Industrial Revolution then really changes things even more in the mid to late 18th century and through the 19th century. And this is a time of great upheaval in Wales. And I should say that between the religious reforms and the Industrial Revolution, you do see some impetus there to the emigration across the Atlantic. So you see the development in Wales of the coal industry, the iron industry, copper, slate, lead, all of these things, all of these commodities are being mined, manufactured, exported. And this also changes the population of Wales. More and more people are moving from agricultural regions in North and West Wales to South Wales, where the industrial centres are. And this also changes some of the language dynamics as well, because you also have people coming in from England and other parts of the United Kingdom, Ireland, and even elsewhere in Europe to work in industrial South Wales. There's a big period of, there's a significant period of political unrest that begins in the 1830s. And with more and more people crowding into the cities in South Wales, more and more people working in industry, there's considerable dissatisfaction with the political and the economic situation. And this is one of the things that also inspires some emigration to North America. And following that, there is, of course, political form, the more and more democracy throughout Wales and the United Kingdom in general. The other factor in Welsh history that I'd like to speak to then is, some of the social changes that took place after 1900 are, the decline of use in the Welsh language. And a lot of this had to do, not only, I've spoken about industrialization and the people coming in who were English speakers, and also the lower status of the Welsh language, according to the state, but also mass media, movies, radio, and eventually television had a big impact on the Welsh language because all of that material was in, all of that media was in English for a very long time. And so there was a significant decline in the use of Welsh, which set alarm bells ringing among some of the Welsh academics and Welsh speakers. And you start to see a revival of the Welsh language beginning in the early 1960s. There's a protest movement. There are people who are, there's a push to restore Welsh language education. And this has continued to the present day. And I would argue personally that I think the Welsh language is extremely important to the identity of the Welsh people and Wales. And then finally, the one final development I'd like to speak to is the establishment of a parliament for Wales. There was a referendum that was held in 1997 to ask the people of Wales if they would actually like to have their own assembly and be democratically represented, by a body that just represented them in their own country. And this referendum passed, and the Senedd Cymru, as you can see, Senedd is a Welsh word that sounds a lot like the English word Senate, was established in 1999 and was actually officially named in English a parliament in 2017. So you can see there, Wales has had a long journey from over the centuries, a long struggle to sort of maintain its own identity and preserve its language and traditions. This is a map of Wales in 1610. We actually have an original copy of this map in our museum in Wymo, Nebraska. And this was published by a gentleman named John Speed as part of an atlas that was printed in London at the beginning of the 17th century. And I think this is a significant map for this presentation because, of course, 1610 is right between the first English voyages and settlements in Virginia and the voyage of the Mayflower to establish the Plymouth colony in 1620. So what you are looking at is a map of Wales as it would be actually from the early 1600s, almost up until 1800 in terms of being mostly an agricultural country. You will see that there are a number of towns which are shown, and most of them have castles, which most of those castles were built by the English crown to keep the Welsh in check. But Wales was, it only has 3 million people today. That it was even had much fewer than that at that time. So it's a very rural country, not particularly wealthy, and the dominant class in Wales would be, as I've said, the gentry. These are people who, some of them are English, most of them are actually descendants of the Welsh noble families of the Middle Ages. And but all of them, most of them really see themselves as part of the English establishment and the English state. So one of the ways in which people try to better themselves in this situation, of course, was to emigrate. And one of the first major, I should just backtrack a second and say that from the time of the first English colonies in North America, there were Welsh people who were part of those settlements and part of those ventures. In New England, for example, I believe there is a town called Swansea in, I think, Massachusetts, which is named after a town in Wales. Welsh people pop up here and there throughout the English colonies. There was a very famous Welsh poet named Gronwy Owen, who ended up living in Virginia. He was a teacher at the College of William and Mary in Virginia. So there are certainly a lot of Welsh individuals popping up throughout the colonial period in the New World. But the first sort of concentrated effort to get Welsh people as a group to colonize in North America really took place with the establishment of what was called the Welsh Tract in Pennsylvania. And it was the primary motivation for this was a group of Welsh Quakers who were being persecuted for their beliefs in Britain. The Quakers, were a denomination that did not recognize the authority of the Anglican Church. Some of the Baptists, as well, at the same time, were also dealing with some of this persecution, and so they wanted some religious freedom for themselves, and they were granted 40,000 acres to establish a Welsh colony by William Penn in 1681. And I should say, sometimes people assume that William Penn was himself a Welshman, but that is not actually true. He was an Englishman. But such is the significance of the presence of the Welsh in early Pennsylvania that many people have made that assumption about William Penn, that he too was Welsh. Of those 40,000 acres, about 30,000 acres were actually purchased by the Welsh settlers, who were, some of them organized companies, some of them bought the land outright themselves. And these settlers began arriving in 1682 It would usually, it was a group of about 40 or 50 people, because it might be the settler and his family, as well as farm laborers, indentured servants, other people who sort of tagged along to be part of this, this Welsh colony. And the idea too was to really create really create a sort of self-governing settlement where everybody was Welsh, and everything would be done through the Welsh language. And you know, that was obviously another motivation for getting people to come together as a group. This so-called Welsh tract was located in present-day Montgomery, Chester, and Delaware counties in Pennsylvania, so quite close to Philadelphia. And today, some of these Welsh-named communities that were established by the Welsh settlers, the Welsh Quakers, include Bala Cynwyd, Lower Gwynedd, Upper Gwynedd, Lower Meirion and Upper Meirion, Narberth, Radnor, Tredyffryn, and Uwchlan. Radnor, Narberth, Meirion, Bala Cynwyd, and Gwynedd are all places named after named after places in Wales. And Tredyffryn means the town in the valley, and Uwchlan means, I believe that means the high church. So these names endure to this day and are a testament to the Quakers and the Welsh settlers of the Welsh tract. As I said, most of these people were hoping to establish a Welsh speaking community, and that it would be self-governing. They had aspirations of calling it the Welsh barony. It was as if it would be governed by an aristocrat of Welsh extraction. But in reality, most of these people were assimilated into the English colonial society that surrounded them by the mid 18th century. So another early group of Welsh settlers came to Delaware. They actually arrived, these were Welsh Baptists, another group that was seeking more religious freedom, while also looking for the opportunity to migrate together and maintain their Welsh identity. In 1701, a group of Welsh Baptists arrived in Pennsylvania. They had some disagreements with the other Welsh Baptists in Pennsylvania, and so they decided to purchase 30,000 acres from William. Actually, also this was land that had originally belonged to William Penn. They purchased 30,000 acres in Pencadder Hundred. Pencadder is the name of a town or a place in West Wales, and this is in present Newcastle County, Delaware. And these people established quite a significant Baptist Welsh Baptist community. Eventually, they sort of began sending out groups of settlers from this area to establish new Welsh Baptist communities elsewhere in Pennsylvania and elsewhere in the colonies. And one of the more significant movements was over 10 years between 1736 and 1746, when a group of Welsh Baptists moved to South Carolina, and they settled in at a place I think called the PD River, and that place today is called Welsh Neck. And so Welsh people were located throughout the English colonies. The picture that you see there is it's an older picture of a church that was built. It's known as the Old Welsh Tract Church. And it was built in 1746. It is a Baptist church, and it is still actually used today and still has a congregation and holds services. And just to give you a little bit more of, just a little bit more of an idea of some of the people who were coming. I've spoken about these people who were able to buy land and had a degree of wealth and status in order to do that, even though they were persecuted for their religious beliefs. There were all kinds of Welsh people from all walks of life who were coming to the English colonies. This is a notice of a runaway indentured servant. It was published in a Pennsylvania newspaper in 1751. And I'd like to thank a gentleman named Tony Devaney Morinelli, who is actually working on restoring some Welsh built old Welsh built houses in Pennsylvania, as well as some of the old Quaker residences as well. In doing his historical research, he came across this and shared it online. And so I'll just read this because it's an interesting portrait of how a less well-off Welshman was seen at this time. It says, also run away at the same time from William Lawrence of Haverford, Chester County, Haverford being a Welsh name. That's a place in Wales, Haverford. Welsh, I should say, Welsh is another way that Welsh was often spelt. A Welsh servant man speaks very good English named Walter Tudor, about 30 years of age, a slim, tall, swarthy man, has a down look, some marks of powder in his hands, had on a light-colored broadcloth coat, full trimmed, a red cloth jacket without sleeves, blue cloth breeches, black and white yarn stockings, and old shoes with very thick soles, an old check shirt, old dark-colored silk handkerchief, old felt hat, and brown wig. So a very vivid description of the man. But I think it's also interesting that that it mentions that he speaks very good English, and it shows that people were speaking Welsh. That the Welsh language was still very much alive among some of the people who had come from Wales, even though they were increasingly assimilated into the English-speaking society around them. So, of course, there's a huge change that takes place in colonial America. And, excuse me, sorry. In the 1770s with the American Revolution. And it's often claimed that 16 signers of the Declaration of Independence were Welsh, and it's a bit of an exaggeration to say that, to be honest with you, because certainly many of them did have some, one or two Welsh ancestors. Historians have looked at the claims and shown that some of the people claimed as Welsh weren't really Welsh. And of course, the question comes up to the extent to whether to which these people actually were Welsh in a meaningful way, if they weren't really connected to Welsh culture or using the Welsh language or really connected with a Welsh community. So I just wanted to kind of spotlight just a couple of people, however, who were connected with Welsh people who were connected with the American Revolution. One of these is Richard Price, who actually never came to North America, never came to the United States, but he was extremely influential. He was a philosopher and a political writer. He was born in Wales. He lived in London, as did many influential people of Welsh origin at that time. And he was well acquainted with many figures, important figures in the American Revolution, including Benjamin Franklin, and corresponded with Thomas Jefferson and other leaders of the the movement for independence in the colonies. He wrote a pamphlet supporting and urging the colonies to declare themselves independent. And after the revolution, he was invited to come to the United States, which an invitation which he turned down. But he was given an honorary doctorate by Yale University at the same time as George Washington was awarded that same honor as well. Francis Lewis, who you see on the other side here, was actually a signer of the Declaration who was born in Wales, and he was a wealthy New York merchant who had been born in Wales and was actually one of the signers of the Declaration, who we can say, yes, he really was a Welshman. Thomas Jefferson, you see him right there in the middle with Benjamin Franklin and some of the other revolutionary leaders, in this iconic image of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson is often seen as being a Welsh American, but this is sort of in dispute because he claimed that his ancestors had lived at the foot of Snowdon, which is the highest mountain in Wales, Yr in Welsh, and what the genealogists and historians at Monticello have discovered is that Jefferson actually Jefferson's I think it was his great grandfather had lived on a farm in Virginia that was called Snowdon, and doesn't appear to have had any actual Welsh ancestry, or at least any close to that time. So it appears that, however, that Thomas Jefferson believed himself to be Welsh. So I guess we Welsh will take him. So the next major arrival of Welsh people in the New World begins at the end of the 18th century. And we start to see new groups of Welsh people coming for different reasons. Previously, I had talked about the people who were coming for seeking religious freedom, but there had always been people who were looking for more opportunity to take advantage of the opportunity to purchase land or basically improve their economic situation. Well, one of the first groups in I'm sorry, I should say one of the first efforts then in the 1790s came with a man named Morgan John Rhys. He was a radical Welsh Baptist minister, and he wanted to establish a Welsh colony on the frontier in Pennsylvania. It was a place called Cambria. It actually wasn't far from another town called Ebensburg, which also attracted Welsh people and ended up being much more successful than Cambria was. But he came to America in 1794 from Wales. He actually was quite upset with the political situation in Britain at the time. He was a very strong supporter of the ideas of both the American Revolution and the French Revolution. And at that time, Britain was at war with France over the outcome of the French Revolution. And so Morgan John Rhys was one of the many people who were seen as sort of a dangerous radical in Britain. And with this dissatisfaction in mind, he decided to emigrate to the United States and bring some Welsh people with him. In 1801, some Welsh immigrants start a settlement at a place called Paddy's Run, which is in southwestern Ohio. It's not far from Cincinnati. And this becomes a very significant stopping place for Welsh immigrants in the early 19th century. There's another group of Welsh folk that migrate in a large group in the year 1818 from an area of Cardiganshire in West Wales called Mynydd Bach. Mynydd Bach means the little mountain. And these people came to, they were actually hoping to get to Paddy's Run near Cincinnati, but they ended up, their boat stopped. They'd come across Pennsylvania, they got onto a boat to travel down the Ohio River, and the boat had stopped at a place which is today called Gallipolis, or it looks like Gallipolis, which is on the Ohio River. And these people then decided that southeastern Ohio would be a fairly decent place to settle instead. And so that part of southeastern Ohio has a very strong Welsh presence through the 19th century. And to this day, there is actually a college, which Rio Grande University, which in Rio Grande, Ohio, which is in this area, and they have a Welsh studies department, and they maintain exchange programs with a university in Wales. And this area of southeastern Ohio has sometimes been called Little Cardiganshire because of the large number of people who came from that part of Wales to I think it is Jackson County in southeastern Ohio. Then we see more Welsh people arriving in New York. Upstate New York has a lot of Welsh churches that were established in the first half of the 19th century. And again, more people coming to Ohio, people coming again to Pennsylvania. And again, industry as well as agriculture and the opportunity to own land. All of these things are contributing to people's decision to cross the Atlantic and settle in what is now the United States. And actually, just the image that you see there is an old stone church that was established at a place called Remsen in New York in 1831. It was called the Capel Cerrig, which means the stone chapel. And it was a very significant place in among the Welsh in New York. It was associated with a man named Robert Everett, who was the minister there for many years, who was a very prominent abolitionist and anti-slavery campaigner in the early 19th century, and was also a Welsh speaker and publisher. Just to give you just to take a diversion here and take a look at what these people looked like and what their lives were like. Here is a picture that was painted or drawn in 1851, showing the title is Welsh Fashions Taken on a Market Day. So you get an idea here of what people looked like, what these people coming from Wales, the way that they dressed. I particularly like the woman on the left who appears to be taking a pig for a walk. I think she's taking the pig to market, of course, but gives you just an idea of what country people in Wales looked like at the time. And I'm also going to show you this picture of Welsh Mormon immigrants, because there was a significant migration of converts to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and these individuals are shown here before their departure from Britain. And the story is that there was actually a Welshman in the United States. His name was Captain Dan Jones. He was converted to Mormonism and then returned to Wales. And there was a very significant movement of Mormon missionaries back to Wales to bring people to emigrate ultimately to Utah and Salt Lake City. So just to kind of go through the reasons why people were leaving Wales, and I've touched on this a little bit during our presentation so far. The primary motivations were often economic, very personal and related to the local conditions that people were living in. Most Welsh farmers were tenant farmers. They did not own the land that they farmed, and they often had very little land to farm. And little land was available because Wales is a small country, and population was actually growing at this time. So there was even less land available for a family to farm. There were the rents that these tenant farmers were paying to their landlords were extortionately high. They could not afford it was not really a sustainable situation for many of them. They often had to sell or slaughter all of their livestock just to pay the rent, and then they would have to start all over again, trying to make money as farmers before they could even really feed themselves. So it was a very difficult situation for most of these tenant farmers, although it often wasn't the poorest people who emigrated, because you actually had to have some capital in order to make it across the ocean, to pay for your passage, and hopefully enough to pay for your way once you got to North America. Another factor, of course, we talked about religion. These people many of them were nonconformists, which meant they were Methodists, Baptists. They were not Anglicans, and they had to pay a church tithe, a tax, essentially, to the local parish church, even though they did not agree with the Anglican Church, and even though they attended these Methodist or Baptist Calvinist chapels, they were still required all of the important functions of marriages, funerals, etc. All of those things still had to be done in the Anglican Church. That was the law. So this was very unpopular with them. So that was another reason why they saw an advantage in moving to a country where there was no established church and where they could establish their own. There was also a lot of social and political unrest in the early 19th century. I've spoken a little bit about this, the 1830s, the 1840s. And there was a major riot that took place in 1831 in Merthyr Tydfil, which was one of the major industrial towns of South Wales. And even in the countryside, there was a dissatisfaction with the economic and the political order. There was a series of there was sort of an uprising that took place in rural Wales they were called the Rebecca riots, and what was happening was that there were toll roads being constructed, so farmers had to pay a toll to take their livestock or to travel along a stretch of road from one place to, they would be taking their livestock to market, for instance, and they would have to pay to use the road to do that. And this was extremely unpopular. And there were wealthy people who were taking advantage of this to amass some wealth, and this led to a lot of these tenant farmers tearing down the toll houses, the toll booths, and they did this while dressed in women's clothing. And the movement was called. They were anonymous by wearing women's clothing. They disguised themselves, and this was called the Rebecca riots, and they called their organization Rebecca. And so we have all of these things going on where people are rebelling against the system. Whether people want to have anything to do with this or not, a lot of this also motivates people to get out of Wales and go somewhere else, where either they can have more freedom economically or personally, or they can be far away from all of this this violence and unrest. Another reason why people, of course, were crossing the Atlantic was the fact that they had family and friends who had already gone to America. And this process, as you may know, is called chain migration. And so one person goes to a place in, say, Wisconsin, for example, and writes a letter back to a newspaper in Wales saying, I've arrived in Wisconsin and it's great here, and I'm able to farm a huge amount of land, and please, send some more Welsh people over, and this is a great place for Welsh people to live. And this was happening all the time throughout the 19th century in the press between Wales and the United States. I'm going to read here a little bit of Welsh for you. This is a poem that was, or this is just part of a poem that was composed by a Welshman who settled in Wisconsin. And it expresses some of the feelings that people had about the situation in Wales and in Britain generally, and some of the reasons why people were dissatisfied there and wanted to come to the New World. The title of this poem is Farewell i'r hen wlad, or Farewell to the Old Country. And I'm just going to read the text on the left. What's on the right is some of what's on the left and some other material from other stanzas of the poem, which I'll share with you. But I want you both to see what he's saying, but also get a little bit of flavor of the Welsh language as well. Farewell i'r hen wlad. Farewell Brydain a'i choen a'i chynen, a'i hingol angen na flawen floedd. Farewell Gymru a'i thraws a'r glwyddi, a'i gwladau dlodi sy'n gwaeddi ar goedd. Farewell ffyddlon foen gyfeillion, o anian union a dynion da. A farewell greulon lan elynion, a'i holl ddichellion blynion bla. Farewell bellach I bob ryw grachach, a'i trwyth a'i trethach a ffwlach ffôl. Farewell cryno, i'ch trais a'ch treisio, roedd yn eich gadw I gyd ar ôl. So he starts out by saying, farewell Britain, her complaint and strife, her woeful want, sorrowful cries. Farewell Wales and her oppressive lords, her rustic poor who cry out. And the poem then goes on to talk a little bit about corruption and poverty. Sad is the tyranny and injustice that pollutes England, and by extension Wales, in church and court. And to punish them for their poverty in the workhouse, many hundreds of Welsh mothers, despite being so beloved, are taken away from the children. And this speaks to how families who were so poor that they had to go to what was the county workhouse, which was sort of a prison for the impoverished. Those families were then split up and had to work until and to essentially earn the food to keep them alive. All this barbarism is done under the guise of Christianity, and a prime reason for all to shun it, meaning to shun Britain and sail peacefully across the sea. So what happened to Welsh people after they came to the United States? The term here, immigrant trajectories, it's really a fancy term for where people went and the different routes that they took, and how they got from Wales to where they ended up. some I know of, there's at least one Welsh a Welsh American historian who's done some work on this by reading of the obituaries of thousands of Welsh immigrants and trying to figure out their routes across the United States during their lifetimes. But it was very common for people to actually move several times. They didn't necessarily stay or end up in the place where they had initially immigrated to. As I had mentioned before, many of the Welsh immigrants were attracted to industrial centers in the United States initially. It was the Slate Valley of Vermont and Upper New York State, where slate, which was a commodity that was quarried in North Wales, was those people who had been quarrying in North Wales could then move to Vermont and work in the same industry there, or in Upper New York State. Coal and iron, of course, were big industries in Wales, and Welsh people were naturally attracted to the coal mining regions of Pennsylvania and Ohio, and were actually pioneers of the iron industry in the United States during this time, particularly in southeastern Ohio. And people were working in industrial centers, not necessarily because they intended to be industrial workers for the rest of their lives, but because they could earn the money quickly to save up and then buy land further west and farm, which is what many of these people ultimately wanted to do. The picture that you see here is of two early settlers of Nebraska, actually. Thomas and Catherine Higgins were among the first Welsh homesteaders in Nebraska. And Thomas Higgins arrived in New York City. He lived for a while in Upper New York State and met Catherine, his wife, who was born in the United States of Welsh parents. They lived for a time in Ohio. There was, I believe, a diphtheria epidemic, which encouraged them to move then to somewhere else in the United States, and they settled on Wisconsin for a while. They lived in Wisconsin. And then finally in the 1860s, they heard of land that was being made available to homesteaders, and they settled in southeastern Nebraska, and they were the first Welsh people to take out a homestead claim in southeastern Nebraska, in the state of Nebraska. So this is where the history really begins in earnest for our organization, which is the Welsh heading west in between 1840 and 1880, and some of the history that follows that. We see a lot of Welsh people then starting to move into places like Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri. Welsh people are coming here primarily to farm. Particularly Wisconsin. I've listed a lot of places here, and I know them very well because I live right here in Wisconsin, and in fact, the place where I live here, Spring Green, was home to a significant Welsh population, and I can actually go a mile from my house here in Spring Green and find Welsh inscriptions on the gravestones in the local cemetery. So Welsh people were all over southern and central Wisconsin. They also started farming in Minnesota. In Iowa, there were several Welsh settlements. I mentioned Missouri. Missouri also had a coal mining industry, which attracted some Welsh coal miners. Nebraska, of course, which is where we are located with our organization, was home to some very small but still still somewhat significant Welsh communities. The further west you go, the smaller these Welsh communities really become, but they also maintain their, in some respects, some of them really maintain their Welsh identity much more strongly, perhaps because the numbers of people are so small and they sense the need to do so. South Dakota, in the 1880s, there was a town established called Powell. It was named after a man named William E. Powell, who was the emigration agent for the Milwaukee and St. Paul Railroad. And he was encouraging people to move either from Wales directly or from Wisconsin and other places in the eastern states to move and purchase, or purchase this inexpensive homesteading land that his employer, the Milwaukee and St. Paul Railroad, was making available to the settlers. And of course, the railroads were very keen on encouraging this because they profited from the railroad traffic once these people, not only taking these people there, but then shipping their livestock, their supplies, all of their exports from their farms. There were also state governments and territorial governments in the West and Midwest that were eager to encourage people to settle, and they would print pamphlets and they would send people to around the country and overseas to Europe to encourage immigrants, not only from Wales but also from Germany and England and Ireland and Norway and other countries as well. So this was a huge mass movement of people coming from Europe and the eastern states to the Great Plains. I should mention too that there were Welsh people in Colorado. They were in the Colorado Gold Rush, and there's a little place up in the mountains west of Denver called Russell Gulch, where there was a Welsh church and a significant number of Welsh coal miners, Welsh gold prospectors ended up and are buried there. I've already mentioned the Welsh Mormons, and there was a significant Welsh presence of course, in Utah. They were somewhat, because they were adherents to a different religion. They were somewhat distant for many years from the other Welsh settlers, and but today there is still a very strong sense in Utah and of a Welsh Mormon identity. And very late in the 19th century, we see Welsh people also in homesteading in the far northwest. There is a place called Big Bend in Washington, where a significant number of Welsh people were living. And I should mention that there were Welsh people in California who went to the California Gold Rush and were in California for all sorts of reasons afterwards. After the Civil War, there was a significant number of Welsh people who went to Tennessee because of the coal industry and I think it was the steel industry that was beginning to take off in around Knoxville, Tennessee, after the Civil War. And just to go a little bit more of information about the land that these people were moving into. Moving into a land, of course, this is the period of the ideology of manifest destiny. The United States is spreading west, and so a lot of this land is coming into the hands of the federal government through land cessions from Native American peoples, or due to the forced removal of Native Americans. There's a picture here you see of a man. His name is Sam Hudson. That's his English name, and he was a member of the Oto tribe, which actually had a reservation lands just south of where Wymore is today in Nebraska. And this picture was actually belonged to one of the Welsh families that settled there, and is in our collection at the museum today. And we're not sure about what the relationship between Sam Hudson and the Welsh settlers was, but ultimately the Oto Indians, under pressure not only from settlers but also from some of the local politicians and land speculators, moved on to another location in Oklahoma. So unfortunately, we can't talk to these people. It'd be very interesting to know, to dig deeper into this history and understand this relationship. But essentially, this is land that previously was inhabited by and belonged to the native peoples. Federal land, of course, this land was then made available to settlers at a very inexpensive price, sometimes as low as $1.25 per acre. And I've mentioned again, as I've mentioned before, the railroads in particular were very keen to promote settlement on the land in the West. You can see here a picture of an advertisement in Welsh from a Drych, which is the Welsh language newspaper. And it encourages Welsh people to come and settle in, in the Western and Midwestern states. I realize I'm getting a bit short on time here, so I don't want to, I'm going to just run through a few things quickly here. This is an example of one of the Welsh farms in Nebraska. And we have many, many photos like this in our archive. And as you know, at this time, it was very popular for people to stand outside their farmhouse and show their house, their barn, their windmill, their horses, animals. This is an example of another Welsh immigrant family, the Williams family. They had lived in Iowa, and then they moved to Nebraska, evidently because they heard that they could either acquire more land, or they may have moved because of a family reason. Perhaps they joined another member of their family further west. But there were a lot of people moving around to different places across America during this time, and establishing new Welsh communities. One of the sort of the focal point for Welsh community life really was, for many of these people, was their church. And again, these were American versions of the churches that they had in Wales. So you have the Welsh Calvinistic Methodists, or more commonly known as Welsh Presbyterians in English. You have the Welsh Congregationalists. You have Baptists. You have other groups such as the Wesleyans. You have some Welsh Anglicans, Unitarians, and of course the Latter-day Saints or Mormons that I mentioned. And for the Welsh, they were often strict Sabbatarians, so they would not do anything on Sunday, including cooking or any kind of work. But they did go to sometimes 2 sermons a day on Sunday, as well as a midweek church service. And they had Sunday schools. There was a very popular, towards the end of the 19th century, there was a very popular Welsh youth organization called Christian Endeavour, which many of the Welsh American young people who were in these communities were participated in. And this actually was one of the things that helped maintain the Welsh language in these immigrant communities for a very long time. And was one of the reasons why they had settled together in the first place, was to be able to practice their religion in their language. This is actually the Welsh church that's in now, that no longer stands, but was located just south of Wymore. And this was where, for some time, services were in Welsh. The church no longer stands. But the cemetery is still there with the graves of the Welsh settlers. Not going to dwell too much on this, but Welsh people were very active in public life in the United States after their arrival. You can see here on the left, this is an election pamphlet that was printed in Welsh at the time of the 1860 election. And you see here a biography of Abraham Lincoln. Welsh immigrants were overwhelmingly anti-slavery in the 19th century. In the period before that, they had been, I should say that the Welsh people in the 18th century had, much like the other English colonists, even the Quakers had actually practiced slavery as farmers. But in the 19th century, the Welsh, influenced by their religion, were overwhelmingly abolitionists. and took that idea with them when they joined up to fight in the Civil War. There were many Welsh language publications that were filled with very lively debate about the affairs of the day. And there were many Welsh Americans who pursued elected office. And, again, the Welsh language was extremely important to maintaining their Welsh identity. Most of the immigrants from Wales at this time spoke Welsh, and some only spoke Welsh or did not speak very much English at all. And there were a number of Welsh language newspapers and magazines. One of them is Adrych, which means the mirror. And we actually have a full set of microfilms of Adrych starting in 1851 in our archive in Nebraska. And the Welsh language still continued to be spoken by Welsh people and their descendants well into the 20th century in some places in the US. One of the ways that the Welsh people celebrated their culture was through an event called the Eisteddfod. The Eisteddfod is a competition. It celebrates poetry, music, and the arts through the medium of the Welsh language originally. And these are a couple of the two documents that you see there are actually these are programs from Welsh American Eisteddfodau. The one on the right is actually from Iowa, from the early 1900s. The one on the left is from an event that took place in Chicago in 1893 at the World's Fair, and it was called it was a very ambitious Eisteddfod that brought together Welsh poets and performers from Wales and from North America. And the winning bard or poet was actually awarded the chair that you see in the middle, which has both Welsh and American symbols carved into it. And this is just a souvenir from that event in 1893. We actually have a copy of this framed in our museum, a gallery of Welsh and Welsh American poets who were involved with or participated in that World's Fair Eisteddfod in Chicago in 1893. Music, of course, was also very important to the Welsh, and right down there in Wymore, Nebraska, there was a Blue Valley Welsh band that you can see depicted here. And then, with the passing of time and the older generation of Welsh immigrants passing away, younger people moving to different communities, and the children and grandchildren of Welsh beginning to speak English, you start to see a change in Welsh identity. It becomes less tied to the language. You see the decline of Welsh-speaking churches as more and more of these churches merge with their English-speaking neighbors. And indeed, the Welsh Calvinistic Methodist Church, which was the biggest of the Welsh American denominations, joined the Presbyterian Church in America in 1920. The picture that you see is actually a magazine that was published between 1897 and 1903 in Wisconsin for the Christian Endeavor movement in Welsh, but also it had an English section as well. So it was a bilingual magazine that was aimed at young people. It was called a Lamp, which means, as you can imagine, the lamp. And it was ultimately it was only published for a few years, but it's very symbolic of how the language was changing and how they had to cater both to Welsh speakers and a new generation of people who weren't necessarily able to read and speak Welsh as well as their parents and grandparents. So I'm going to close now by telling you just a little bit about our organization. The Great Plains Welsh Heritage Project is the name of the overarching organization. We have our museum and visitor center in Wymore, Nebraska. You can see the incredible mural that was painted for us. We also have a wide range of exhibits inside our museum, including textiles, artwork. We have original artifacts, historical items that people brought with them from Wales. Everything from teapots to tools, plows that were used by some of the Welsh pioneers, We have some very interesting collections of Welsh embroidery, and of course we have a lot of photographs, and we have a stained glass window from one of the Welsh churches in Nebraska. And of course we hold events there as well when we can. Obviously with COVID, we haven't been able to open our doors as frequently, but we frequently have events, speakers on a wide range of topics, some of them not even related necessarily to Wales and the Welsh. And we invite a lot of people to our centre for many different reasons. In addition to the Great Plains Welsh Heritage Centre in downtown Wymore, I should say that we have what we call the Archive for Welsh America. We house a lot of, as I mentioned, Adreith, the newspaper. We have a lot of Old Welsh periodicals. We have documents like the Sunday School certificate that you see depicted there. We have the records of a large number of Welsh American organizations right down to the present day. We also have some lovely volunteers who you see, two of whom, Janie and Janice, you see diligently working on boxing up some precious items for our archive. And so if you ever need, we're available for genealogical research, translation, and some historical research as well. So please, if you're looking for a Welsh ancestor or some sort of information about Welsh people in America, we're very happy to help you. And we also in Wymore, Nebraska, we also own a schoolhouse, which many of the Welsh immigrant children attended in the late 1800s and up until about 1960. And we also have a railroad museum that celebrates the town's railroad heritage. And there were a number of Welsh immigrants who worked on the Burlington and Quincy Railroad, which had a depot in Wymore. So I just want to thank you. I'm sorry, I've run over time because I didn't realize I should have been looking at my clock. But I hope you've enjoyed the presentation. As I would say in Welsh, diolch yn fawr, which means thank you very much. You can visit us at welshheritageproject.org. That is our official website. And Donella, if you're there, I hope that maybe people have some questions, or there's something else to close out the evening.
Sure, I'm going to turn